Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We're beginning in Bereshit. It's very hard to pick from Bereshit, I gotta tell you. Like when I was reading on the triennial, it was easier, right? Part of the reason I stayed with the triennial for so long is because then I didn't have to pick. I just had to pick from a much smaller, right, group of choices. But when you get to Bereshit, it's really, really hard to choose. But I read some commentary that I was like, I want to talk about this with them. So I want your thoughts on it. I'm still working my way through my ideas about it, but it's the first time I've had like a not radical, but like a new kind of opening of this part of the text for me in years. So I'm excited to see what you think. Okay. So we're going to dig in to Genesis, the end of Genesis 2, beginning of Genesis 3. I'm not going to talk a lot right now. Because you know this text not as well as we could. Okay. So you're familiar with it. I'm not going to talk a lot. I want to talk after we look at the text. Okay. So we're coming to the end of Genesis 2. This is the second creation narrative. Remember, there's two creation stories, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. They are different stories, different traditions about how this whole thing begins. We smash them together in the West, particularly in a Christian understanding. Those get smashed together to be one narrative. They are not. They are two separate traditions, okay, that have to both be in the book if you want everybody to buy the book. We're going to look at the second creation narrative, not so much for it. We're just going to start it, and then we're going to go to the story of the serpent and the tree. All right, so this is the second creation narrative where God makes a garden and plops the Adam in the garden. So this is the second creation narrative. So the first creation narrative, remember, is Zachar v'Nekeva bara otam. Male and female, God created them. That's Genesis 1. Genesis 2 has this version, which is God forms Adam. Adonai Elohim forms Adam, the earthling, from the soil and blows into the earthling's nostrils, Nishmat Chaim, the breath of life. And behold, the earthling became a living being. God plants a garden and placed there the Adam, who had been fashioned. God causes everything to grow. There are rivers involved, the Tigris, right, and the Euphrates. This makes sense. This is the beginning of fertile soil and human civilization. This totally makes sense. The Fertile Crescent. Vayikach Adonai Elohim et Adam, and Adonai Elohim takes the earthling and puts it in the garden to till and tend it. L'ovda u'l'shomra. This is where a lot of Jewish ecological places take their name from. That the human was placed in the garden to serve it and to guard it, to tend it, to keep it. Okay, this is Genesis 2. So this is the purpose of the earthling in the garden in Genesis 2. It is to take care of the garden. Remember, Genesis 1 is more about being the boss over everything. All right, and God commands the human, the earthling, of every tree of the garden you're free to eat. But as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat of it, for as soon as you eat of it, you shall die. God says, it is not good for the human to be alone, the earthling to be alone. I will make a fitting counterpart for him. And so now God makes a bunch of animals. Again, this is different than Genesis 1 that has all the animals and then human beings last. This is a different creation narrative. God forms out of the earth creatures and brings them all, each of them, each species to the human to see what the human would call them. And whatever the human called the living creature, that would be its name. So the human knows something. The human has some kind of wisdom already. And the human gave names to all the cattle and the birds of the sky and the wild beasts, but no fitting counterpart for the earthling was to be found. What are we looking for? Ezer kenegdo. Ezer, help, a help, kenegdo, over and against him, across from him. So Ezer here is not help meet. Y'all know that makes me crazy when I see that translation. This is Ozer, the same way the psalmist calls God Ezri, my help. Help comes from a source that is stronger than you are. Help is God to the psalmist. So helper here does not mean assistant human. Helper means somebody who has something that I don't, that I need. I need their ozer. I need them to be an ozer, a help for me. Because I am, in the psalmist, it's always weak. The psalmist is weak and needs God's strength. Okay. So God puts, out of compassion, a tardema on the Adam, a deep sleep. Think of a colonoscopy. That's how I like to think about this procedure. Is that Adam has a really good nap, right? The earthling has a really good nap, and takes one of sal otav, one of his salot, okay, and closes up the flesh underneath it. Okay, so God does surgery, removes one of the earthlings something or others, and then closes up the wound, the flesh underneath. What is this? Classically, we've thought about it as a rib because it's plural. One of his thingamabobs. Well, if he's got more than one of them, what do we have more than one of that's like a tzalot, like bones or something, but it can mean side. It could mean that God took one of the earthling's sides, right? That would explain a little bit about Genesis 1, Zachar v'nekeva bara otam. God created the earthling hermaphroditically as male and female, and God divides them at this point into male and female. So God takes one side, right? Okay. There's a great article in archaeology, the Biblical Archaeology Review. You can look it up, that suggests that this actually is the baculum. Human beings lack a penis bone. Other primates and other animals, mammals, have a bone in the penis called the baculum. And some want to say this is how the elephant got its trunk. This is a story about why human beings don't have one. It's because God made Adam's partner out of the penis bone. And that makes some sense if you want to think about Adam giving birth to Chava, right? Like that's the organ that's used for reproduction. It makes some sense. I don't think it's such a stretch, actually. It would explain why don't humans have one? If primates have them, why not humans? Gorillas have them. Why not humans? Okay. So anyway, I won't belabor that. Vayivein Adonai Elohim et hatzela, and so God fashions the side. This is why some people argue for the hermaphrodite explanation, that God took from the person from the earthling, leisha, as a woman, vayiveha el ha'adam, and brought her to the earthling. And the earthling said, this is etzem me'atzamai, a bone, me'atzamai, from my bones, uvasar mi besari, and flesh from my flesh. Lezot yikare isha ki meish lukhazot. So this one I will call, remember, he's named all the other animals. So now he's naming Chava, and he says, to this one I will call Isha, woman, because from Ish was she taken. Makes perfect sense, right? Isha. So you add a hey at the end of Ish. Hey is the feminizing letter, right? It makes things feminine in Hebrew. So that makes perfect sense. If she's taken from Ish, she becomes Isha. She becomes the feminine version of Ish. Okay, so far so good. Hence, a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife so that they become one flesh. Okay, so that makes perfect sense. Now, here we go. Here's where we're going to start down the path. Vayiyu shnehem arumim ha'adam ve'ishto v'lo yitboshashu. So they were, the two of them, naked, the earthling and his woman, v'lo yitboshashu. But they were not ashamed. All right. We're going to go there. So now here comes Genesis 3. Ve'anachash haya arum mikol chayat hasadeh. All right, so wait a minute. The two of them were what? Arum, naked. The Nachash, we're told, starting chapter 3, haya arum mikol chayot hasadeh, is the most arum of all of the beasts of the field. Okay, wait. So now we're being told the serpent is also arum. But what does it mean, arum, here for the serpent? It doesn't seem to mean naked. All right. So it says to the Isha, to Chava, Af ki amar Elohim lo tuchlu mikol etz hagan. Is it true that God said to you not to eat from all the trees of the garden? And she says to the snake, Mipri eitz hagan nochel, we can eat. We're supposed to eat from the fruit of the garden. Umipri, the disjunctive of, but from the tree, from the fruit of the tree that's in the middle of the garden, God said, Lo tochlu mimenu, you do not eat from it, v'lo tik ubo pentamutun, and don't touch it, lest you die. And the snake says to the woman, you're not going to die. But God knows that the day that you eat from it, your eyes will be open, this beautiful Hebrew verb for opening that only pertains to eyes. It's a beautiful Hebrew word. And your eyes will be open, and you will be like Elohim. Like, you'll be like, now does it mean Elohim capital E or little e Elohim? God, or like gods? Yodea tov v'ra, knowing good and evil. And the woman saw the tree was good for eating and a delight to the eyes, and that it was really pleasant, right, as a source of wisdom. So she ate from the tree, and the woman also gave, she took its fruit and ate. She also gave le'isha, this is a double hay, that's why there's a dagesh in the hay, her man who was with her, and he ate. And again, this beautiful Hebrew word, v'tipachna einei shnehem, and the eyes of the two of them were opened, and they knew ki arumim heim, that they were arum, that they were naked. V'yitperu alei tena v'ya'asu lahem chogrot, and they took fig leaves and sewed the, big leaves, and sewed them together as loincloths. And they heard at Kol Adonai Elohim, the voice of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh Elohim, walking around, a-walkin', this is the Hebrew form of I went a-walkin' after midnight, right? So God is a-walkin', bagan, in the garden, l'ruach hayom, at the breezy part of the day, vayitchabeh ha'adam v'ishto, and Adam and his wife hid mipnei Adonai, from the face of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh Elohim, betoch etz hagan, among the trees of the garden. Vayikra Elohim. Vayikra Adonai Elohim el ha'adam. Vayomer. Vayomer lo. Ayeka. So God calls to Adam, the earthling, and says, Ayeka, where are you? Vayomer. And he said, Et kol chashamati bagan va'ira ki erom anochi va'echave. I heard your voice in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Vayomer, and he said, meaning God, Mi higid lecha ki erom ata. Who told you that you're naked? Have you eaten from the tree that I told you you weren't allowed to eat from? Vayomer ha'adam, and the earthling says, the woman that you gave me, she gave it to me, and I ate. And so Adonai Elohim says, La'isha, to the woman, Mazot asit, what is this you have done? And the woman says, the snake tricked me, and I ate. So God responds, because you did this to the snake, to the serpent, more cursed shall you be than all cattle and all the wild beasts, for on your belly you shall crawl, and dirt shall you eat all the days of your life. So the serpent loses its legs as punishment for this tricking of the Isha into eating the fruit. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. They shall strike at your head, and you shall strike at their heel. So we're going to be, enemies with snakes from now on. And God told the woman, I will greatly expand your hard labor and your pregnancies. In hardship shall you bear children. Your urge shall be for your husband, but he shall rule over you. Okay? The world as it is at the time of the writing of Torah. Let us be clear. This is how it was. These stories come to talk about how it is, a little bit about how it should be. And that's where I want to go this morning, a little bit about how it should have been. And because you did this and you ate when your wife gave it to you, when I told you not to eat of it, the ground will be cursed because of you. By hard labor, you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Meaning it's not just going to be for you like it is in Eden, where you can just eat all you want. Thorn and thistles shall it sprout for you now, but you can't eat those. So you're going to have to cultivate, says this agricultural culture, you have to cultivate now the field, because all it's going to give you naturally is thorns and thistles, and you can't survive on that now. By the sweat of your brow shall you get bread to eat until you return to the ground, for from it you were taken. For dust you are, unto dust you shall return. You know me, you know I point to this verse all the time to say, they were already mortal in the garden. They're already mortal. Vayikra Adam Shem Ishto Chava, and the human named his woman Chava, life giver, because she was going to be the mother of all living. Meaning from now on, all human beings would come from Chava, not from taking a part of Adam. And God makes garments of skin for Adam and his wife, Vayil Bishem, and clothed them very close. I just realized for the first time in studying this business, it's very close to the word Velo Yiposhashu. They weren't ashamed. Shame, Vayil Bishem, and God clothes them. So this is a very similar sounding word for being ashamed and being clothed. Very interesting. And God says, now that humankind has become like any of us, knowing good and bad, what if one of them should stretch out a hand and take a lass from the tree of life and live forever? That can't happen. Now that they know the difference between good and evil, so God banished humankind from the Garden of Eden to till the earth from which it was taken. Again, they are already mortal, but they had the possibility of eating from the tree of life and living forever until they ate of the tree of good and evil. Anybody got anything so far? We all good? We good?
I have a quick question
Yes.
because I did read this morning on Safaria. So, you know, the verse 22 in the English translation, and it says, now that humankind has become like any of us. So what is the us? Does that mean there's multiple gods, or what is that?
Yeah, interesting. Some people want to argue it is a leftover from when the Israelites had a pantheon. And this is one of the linguistic indicators that Israelites were not originally monotheistic. And we know they weren't purely monotheists anyway. We're only allowed to worship Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and be in relationship to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, but it doesn't mean there aren't other gods, like Baal and Ishtar and, right, all the famous people in the neighborhood. So that's one possibility. The rabbis can't have that, of course. So it is, of course, God speaking to the hosts of heaven. It is God speaking to the angels, that Adam might become more like the angels who don't die. Yes, Lynn.
I'm so glad we're reading this now. I've always had the question, the concept of nakedness.
Mm-hmm.
And where does that come from, being something to be ashamed of?
Mm-hmm.
And specifically for women, her breasts and crotch, and for men, their crotch. Why do they know those are the two parts of being exposed to the elements that one should be ashamed of?
Right. Okay. So let's go there. That's exactly, thank you, Lynn. I did not pay her, I swear. But that's exactly where I want to go this morning because of this commentary that I read. That, like I said, I never really thought about it like this before. So here we go. Sorry, this always happens, y'all. I apologize. All right. So this is a commentary by Rabbi Lisa Goldstein. She has taught for us during COVID. And she's talking about this idea of shame and talks about this scene that we just looked at and talks about how they were not ashamed. Rashi has his own explanation, but I don't want to go there. She wants to look at shame that goes right to how we feel that we are not enough, right? And she says, the fact that Torah begins the story of humanity with the experience of shame is an indication that there's a reason for this deep kind of shame, right? So our ancestors are struggling with the idea of shame. They felt it too. So what are they doing with this, right? So we get the story, and they become aware of their nakedness, and they are ashamed. And Rabbi Lisa Goldstein asks, what just happened here? Why Adam doesn't seem to feel guilty, right? Adam doesn't say, I heard you coming, and because I disobeyed your commandment about eating from the tree, I was afraid. That's guilt. I did the wrong thing. I never thought about that before. That is not what Adam answers. Adam is not hiding because Adam did something wrong. That would be guilt. Adam is hiding because he is ashamed that he is naked. I never thought about that. So what does she do with that? Lisa Goldstein says, young toddlers, children cannot separate guilt and shame. Often, when they get in trouble, they think they are bad, not that they have done something bad. And they have to mature in order to get to a place of understanding right and wrong. And when they do something wrong, they're guilty and can rectify that by apologizing, by trying to repair, by whatever, promising not to do it again. Shame is I am bad. I am unworthy of love. So I want to stay here. I know it sounds like I'm muddying the waters, but I promise I'm not. Well, I'm going to muddy them more, but then, okay. So this connection is about shame, about something primordial about themselves being unworthy. She's going to argue it's because the parent is angry with them and calls them out. Where are you? Right? But he seems to be afraid before that, before God calls, right? Adam hears God's voice and hides. So she is suggesting that children are too frightened when their parents are displeased with them because our whole survival depends on the grown-ups who take care of us, that we can't imagine that our parents are wrong or bad because it's too terrifying. Something must be wrong with us. And we shame ourselves. And the other thing we do, the woman you put at my side, she gave me of the tree and I ate. What else do? We turn it. We learned early on to shame ourselves or blame others as a way of staying connected to our imperfect environments. We all learned to hide part of ourselves. It was an unconscious way of saving our own lives. It was so unconscious, we don't always even know it's there. And then she talks about mindfulness practice and how it can be very painful to meditate because when we sit down and we get quiet and we stop the monkey mind and we just let everything settle, what we tend to have come up is shame. All those narratives of shame. But now that we are adults, we have more options. By bringing the ways we shame ourselves into our awareness, we can start cultivating a new relationship to it. We can start asking ourselves, wait a minute, is that really true? What if that thing I believe about myself is not who I really am? We might even be able to extend some compassion towards our shame for trying to protect us all those years ago. These are important steps towards healing. All right, so she's saying shame is something that children experience. Adam and Chava are children. They are newborn humans, even if they are full size. They are completely immature. And they are doing what children do. When they feel like they're in trouble, they blame themselves, they shame themselves, and not the parent who is upset with them, because that's too threatening to them. Okay. Interesting. So I want to, from her commentary, I want to take, he doesn't answer, I heard you, I disobeyed you, and so I'm afraid. He answers, I was ashamed. Okay, so let's take that part of her commentary, and let's go. Okay, here we go. That sent me to the work of Brene Brown, because I remember the work of Brene Brown, who deals in shame research. So then I wanted to go look at Brene Brown again and watch her TED Talk again. So you can watch her TED Talk. She has several, but watch her original one. She does research on shame, and she talks about the difference between shame and guilt. That guilt is adaptive and helpful. It's holding something we've done or failed to do up against our values and feeling psychological discomfort. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. I don't believe, she says, shame is helpful or productive. In fact, I think shame is much more likely to be the source of destructive, hurtful behavior than the solution or cure. I think the fear of disconnection can make us dangerous. And it seems God agrees. Because they are ashamed, God realizes they are dangerous and cannot live forever. And the beginnings of the unraveling of God's perfect, good world, not perfect, good, God's good world starts to come undone because the humans feel shame. Okay. According to her book, Daring Greatly, shame is the fear of not being worthy of connection and belonging. It is the fear that you are not enough and will be rejected for your weaknesses. It overtakes the prefrontal cortex and initiates your flight or fight response. Instead of being able to think critically or analyze the legitimacy of a threat, you are thrust into survival mode. And once the shame cycle begins, you really only have 3 options: fight, freeze, or run. What does Adam do? Adam runs and hides. This is one of the basic 3 options when the prefrontal cortex shuts down, the amygdala starts screaming, and lizard brain takes over. He hides. Being in this type of survival mode prevents you from connecting meaningfully with yourself and others, which impedes your ability to live wholeheartedly. So shame is a terribly destructive force that is there in us. This story is describing it, not explaining why, but it seems to have something to, it's in some kind of relationship to the knowledge of good and evil. But how, we don't know. We don't know. But look at what Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks does in his book, Studies in Spirituality, a weekly reading of the Jewish Bible. Look what he does. Oh, I love this. So he says, when we experienced the attack on Pearl Harbor, we were going to war against Japan. We didn't know much about their culture. And so they went to an anthropologist, Ruth Benedict, to explain Japanese culture to them, which later became the book, The Chrysanthemum and the Sword. She says, and he says, one of her central insights was the difference between shame cultures and guilt cultures. In shame cultures, the highest value is honor. In guilt cultures, it is righteousness. Shame is feeling bad that we have failed to live up to the expectations others have of us. Guilt is what we feel when we fail to live up to what our conscience demands of us. Shame is other-directed. Guilt is inner-directed. All right, Lynn, do you see where I got fascinated and tried to dig in here a little? All right, so shame is about what others are going to think of us. Guilt is what I think of me based on my standards as I experience them today. Hopefully, they're always growing and getting refined. Philosophers have pointed out that shame cultures are usually visual. Oh, what did they do when they realized they were arum, that they were naked? What did they do, Lynn? They covered themselves up. So like you suggested, like so that it wasn't seen. Aha. Well, if it's about shame, they are highly visual cultures. It makes total sense then that what you would do is cover so something related to shame is not seen. I never thought about that before. The instinctive reaction to shame is you wish you were invisible or somewhere else. What does Adam do? He hides. He hides. Guilt, by contrast, is much more internal. You cannot escape it by becoming invisible or being elsewhere, like in the trees. Your conscience accompanies you wherever you go, regardless of whether you are seen by others or not. Guilt cultures are cultures of the ear, not the eye. Where do you think he's going, y'all? Where do you think he's going? With this contrast in mind, we can now understand the story of the first sin. It is all about appearances, shame, vision, and the eye. The serpent says to the woman, God knows on the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. That is, in fact, what happens. And what was it about the tree that drew the woman? It was the appearance of the tree that Torah emphasizes. The woman saw the tree was good to eat and desirable to the eyes. The tree was attractive as a means to gain intelligence. The key emotion in the story is shame. Before eating the fruit, the couple were naked, but lo yitbashashu, they were not ashamed. After eating it, they feel shame and seek to hide. Every element of the story, the fruit, the tree, the nakedness, the shame, has the visual element typical of a shame culture. But in Judaism, we believe that God is heard, not seen. The first humans heard God's voice moving about in the garden in the wind of the day. Replying to God, the earthling says, I heard your voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. Note the deliberate, even humorous irony of what the couple did. They heard God's voice in the garden and hid themselves from God. But you can't hide from a voice. Hiding means trying not to be seen. It is an immediate, intuitive response to shame. But the Torah is the supreme example of a culture of guilt, not shame. And you cannot escape guilt by hiding. Guilt has nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with conscience, the voice of God in the human heart. The sin of the first humans in the Garden of Eden was that they followed their eyes, not their ears. Their actions were determined by what they saw, the beauty of the tree, not by what they heard, the word of God commanding them not to eat from it. The result was that they did indeed acquire a knowledge of good and evil, but it was the wrong kind. They acquired an ethic of shame, not guilt, of appearance, not conscience. Oh, okay. Wait. Okay. Mind blown. Sachs is saying, I think, I'm still trying to work it through. What if, Lynn, this story is a critique of cultures of shame and is the beginnings of a story of a culture of guilt? What if they had eaten from the tree of life first, right? There are many scholars who want to say that was the sin. They ate from the wrong tree. They ate from the wrong tree, y'all. Why? Because of how it looked. And when they did that and disregarded the voice telling them something about what they were supposed to do and not supposed to do, they ignored that, went after what they saw to be good or desirable, and in doing that, gained a knowledge of good and evil that had to do with how they looked. And they felt shame in how they looked, and they covered themselves up. What if this story is coming to say that's the original problem? We're not supposed to be ashamed of how we look. We are beautiful creatures. God creates the human being and says, Tov me'od, it is very, very good. We messed it up by going after visual stuff. And visual cultures are the ones that Israelites were surrounded by. That's why they're not allowed to make visual representations of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh, because it gets us in trouble. It takes us to shame. How we look to others, not to guilt. How I have transgressed my own standards of what I understand to be right and wrong. How has it taken me 60 years to get there? Okay. Alex, then Richard, then Rachel.
So I see that, but then I also see this is a story of the push and pull of impulse versus intuition.
Okay.
Which is like the natural state of, that's the human condition. We're fighting the impulse, right, of what we see versus our gut, which is telling us no, but our impulse is so strong. So that constant push and pull.
Yes. So this is a story about how it is. This is a story about how humans are. What I want to suggest is that it is a critique of making choices based on what we see or how we appear to others.
Yes, but so the shame piece, so I fully see that, but I feel, and maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but to me, or maybe this is what you were saying, that shame is external driven.
Yes.
Yeah, and then the guilt is
yes.
a result of the shame.
Yes. Guilt,
Guilt,
no. Shame is externally motivated. Guilt is an internal assessment that I have failed my own standards of right and wrong.
Yes, but the shame, I don't feel is necessarily like from the story that is being described. To me, shame, we learn shame because of the reaction of others, right? Or
right.
Are you saying that, okay, I just wanted to clarify that, because to me, shame isn't like, oh, I came up with this idea that I should feel ashamed. Right. I often think of shame as, well, what others are telling me is shameful, and therefore I might feel guilt. Mm-hmm. And also guilt can be its own beast as well.
Okay, I want to separate shame and guilt, though. I want to keep them separate.
I see the separation. But do you think shame is a learned behavior, I guess is what I'm saying?
Yes, it is not guilt. It is not guilt.
But often I feel like people feel guilty.
I say no. I say no. And I do this in counseling all the time. People do, it is not guilt. It is shame. Something is bad about me. Guilt is I did something bad. Shame
yeah, I see what you're saying.
Is I am bad.
Yes.
Okay. So Rachel?
I just wanted to bring up something historical that this made me think about. And that is when you said that all of they're surrounded by all of these cultures in the region that seem to be more along, more shame derived cultures. And so I'm thinking about the Parthians. Romans called them Parthians. Those are the Persians. And there's also an argument. It's very controversial. A writer named Fatima Mernissi. I think she's Moroccan. She talks about it, and she talks about. She goes back to. She calls the root word of hijab is actually curtain in Arabic, and that it was meant to that you could translate it as a directive to put a curtain, a screen in the tent, of the Prophet's house, just to protect women from, like onlookers and so forth, and, people coming and going. And that it was the Parthian women who wore a full covering, in and out of the house. This was not something that was, native to, this was not something that was typical of Arab culture, that this was specifically, and Persians are not Arabs. It's very, very, this is different. These are different peoples, and that it was adopted by this outside culture, for complicated reasons that I won't get into here. But it just makes me think that this is it just made me think about that, and how this does seem to be. It would make sense too, because Islam is another, they're also people of the book, right? And so it would make sense that early on there would have been, there would have been, more of a kind of, no, we're not on the, we're not on the shames, we're not on, on the shame thing. We're on the, we're on the guilt thing, until it sort of, maybe shifted gears. But you do see the remnants of this all over that region, right? Where you have, honor cultures, honor killings, but it's not necessarily the way we think about it. There are much deeper historic roots that are Well, okay. I think, did I make sense there? Okay.
Totally.
That was all I wanted to say.
No.
Richard, then Mehmet.
In the spirit of Torah being everything everywhere all at once, is it possible that this episode of hearing, or the importance of hearing as opposed to seeing, is about the earliest possible foreshadowing of what happens at Sinai, when you have the people, they have sort of matured to the point where they're able to say, we have heard and we obey.
Yes. And he goes there. Sachs goes there.
Okay.
Yes. Na'aseh v'nishma. And that it is the voice of Sinai, right? And that the whole story, this whole story that we're looking at, is how humanity starts to mess it all up and is going in the wrong direction. And God has to start with a certain family. God realizes God can only start with one family, Avraham and Sarai. And God, what does God do? God calls to Avraham, Lech Lecha, go. Right? And Avraham hears and agrees. And that is the beginning of the culture of guilt, meaning righteousness, and not shame and honor. Okay. Mehmet?
One last thing, though. Based on what you just said, though, isn't it interesting, then, though, that Moshe sees the burning bush? He doesn't hear the burning bush. He doesn't hear the voice of God coming from the bush until he looks at the bush. I just put it out there.
Yeah, because that's what he knows. A visual culture.
Okay, right.
Nice. I like it. Right. Mehmet?
Amy, thanks to you this year, Genesis 2 makes so much more sense to me, and it feels very personal. As a gay man, I can relate to that so much, both from the concepts of shame and guilt, which I think very intricately linked in my case. Mm-hmm. I grew up trying to hide my true identity, and every time I dare to feel dress up the way I want or walk the way I want, not particularly that masculine, in a Mediterranean culture, in a patriarchal culture, the society made me feel shameful. Mm-hmm. And along with that came guilt, that it took me years to get rid of it, until I met my now husband. We've been together 29 years, and we gave each other so much strength. And I grew up with a nightmare in my teenage years. I would dream of going to the school, and I was naked all the time. Mm-hmm. And people would see that I'm naked. And I was trying to hide. This came back years later, even like every few years it comes back to me, until someone said, well, that's linked to your LGBTQ identity. You don't want people to see who you are. You go back to that child. And thank you.
That's so beautiful.
Thanks, Mehmet, for going there. Everybody who has had the dream of going to school and being naked, raise your hand. All right. Do you see that? Yeah. We all have that. Well, many of us have the dream that we show up at elementary school and we're naked and we just want to hide. That is absolutely where this story comes from. If you ask me, it is a basic human response to feeling vulnerable and judged by others, by feeling deep vulnerability around shame.
And then there are times when we keep saying each other, let's try not showcase that we're Jewish, Mm-hmm. That's another thing. My gay identity, my Jewish identity share so much from each other.
Yeah. And it's informed by the same thing, right? Internalized homophobia is how we have shame about being gay people, and internalized anti-Semitism is how we feel, shame about being Jewish. 100%. Judith?
Thank you, Amy. I heard a story told by Rabbi Levi Olin, which illustrates the other side of this discussion we're having. It was about the bombardier on the Enola Gay who dropped the bomb over Japan. And when he came back to Texas after the war, he started to rob banks. And he would call the police and say, I've just robbed the such and such bank. Come get me. They'd come get him, and he had a lot of psychological help. They'd let him go. He'd go out and do the same thing again.
Of course.
It was guilt. He felt such guilt for violating his moral structure and killing so many people that he reacted in that way. I thought that was a beautiful, beautiful illustration of guilt.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And illustrates your point of the difference between the two.
Right. So the ways that he felt like he couldn't make up, because
guilt,
the way we deal with guilt is to
punish,
atone.
Right. Or
atone. And so you atone by repairing, by apologizing, by committing to not doing it again, to getting treatment so it doesn't happen again.
Right.
He felt there was, I imagine, there was nothing he could do to address the horror of how much he had violated his own understanding of what's right and wrong.
Exactly.
And so that is where it's really, really hard, because we have to be able to work through something to be able, to then deal with it. Brene Brown's work on shame talks about vulnerability, that vulnerability takes incredible courage. And that is where all creativity, innovation, all that stuff comes from, is from our willingness to be vulnerable, which means admitting our guilt.
Yes.
So one of my big things is that I tell people when they come to me and they say, I feel guilty. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't feel guilty. The guilt is not a feeling. Guilt is a judgment. I should have done X and I did Y. That is a judgment. That is not a feeling. As my CPE supervisor said, there are 5 feelings. 5. Mad, sad, glad, scared, and hurt. That's it. There are 5 feelings, Amy. Mad, sad, glad, scared, and hurt. Which is it? Which are you feeling? He was from Tennessee. Mad, sad, glad, scared, or hurt. 5. Guilt is not a feeling. So I guess what I'm saying for the importance of this is that, Mehmet, you identified, and you can hear it in your shaky voice, the incredible power of shame to shut us down. And we either want to turn it inward into depression, addiction, whatever, or we want to push it outward into hate, into otherizing, into blaming, into attacking, into aggression. And she talks about all of this. Or we want to just numb out completely and disappear, right? So that 4th glass of wine, shopping on the internet, sex, sleeping, whatever it is that helps us just check out altogether. Guilt is something that we can and must address, and we're just coming off of Yom Kippur. Guilt is something we're supposed to work with. It's an indicator that we're not as righteous as we would like to be. That is a healthy process. To experience guilt is productive and growthful and healthy, unless you're thrust into what Judith, describes about this pilot who didn't have a choice necessarily about doing something that so violated his own code of ethics. Then you get crazy. Then you just get crazy. But those of us who are dealing with the normal guilt, most of us did not drop a bomb on Hiroshima. Most of us are just dealing with regular old hurting people or betraying ourselves. In that world, and that's what this story is about, right? In that world, guilt is to be worked through. Shame is something else entirely. And it can't lead to them growing It can't, and it doesn't. What leads to growth is a covenant relationship where we internalize what's good and what's bad and act from there, and then try to figure out legislation and other things to make that societally enforced, if you will, righteousness, justice, and then have to figure out how to deal with our own experiences of failure in living up to our understanding of what's right and wrong and working through that. And that is the covenantal relationship that is established with our myth of founding, parents, Abraham and Sarah, and in this idea of the people entering a covenant relationship with the divine from hearing what's right and what's wrong at Sinai. We are a people of hearing, of righteousness. We are not a people of shame and external understandings of what it is to be a good person in the world. Thank you all for your incredible attention. It's a joy always to study with you. It is because of you that I'm able to have new experiences of texts that I've been studying my whole life. So thank you for that.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.